Good Monday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and welcome to Real Talk with Keith Smith. Thank you kindly for joining us, guys. A worldwide audience at our disposal as we're live on every social media platform known to mankind. This show originates in the Macklin Building in Charlottesville, Virginia. But Central Virginia, the Commonwealth, the country, the world, our audience. And today's topic is going to be real estate. And today's guest is going to be a man that needs very little introduction. Jeff Gaffney, the CEO of Real Estate 3. Joey Rifkin is our guest. And Joey, as we welcome our guest to the show now, my friend, I want to salute you for doing a heck of a job directing the program. We want to highlight Keller Williams Alliance and Yes Realty Partners for making the show possible. In fact, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you will see the who's who of trusted advisors in real estate on the supply chain that is critically important to local economies, Commonwealth economies, and country economies. Let's go to the guests in the panel. Keith Smith, good morning. Jeff Gaffney, good morning. How you fellas doing?
Morning. Jeff, there's about 3 people watching this that don't know you. Let's start off with introducing yourself. And I did not know you were the highest point scorer in UVA soccer. So
we try to keep that a secret. Not many people know it, but it's kind of another lifetime ago. But
we all have one of those.
I'm known around the community, I guess, as the CEO of Real Estate 3. I've been with the company over 30 years, but what really makes me famous is that I'm married to Dr. Mo Gaffney. Have a wonderful wife who spent the last year as the principal of the Covenant Lower School. So I got very involved in that community with my wife. We have 4 children that we've raised in Charlottesville. 3 of the 4 went to UVA graduates. The 4th graduated from Hokie, Virginia Tech, and so I am Hokie friendly. It took me a little while on that, but I am Hokie friendly, and just love Charlottesville. I've been in real estate, as I said, for over 30 years. Love it here. It's a great community, great place to raise a family, and thanks for having me on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. We're titling this Lessons from Legends, and you qualify as a legend. Plus, you got legendary hair, man, which we talk about regularly on this show. So we wanted to kick off a little bit about Glenmore. We kind of wanted to talk a little bit about a specific subdivision on that end of it. And can you give us...
Well represented on the set right now.
Well represented. Can you give us like a quick synopsis of the history of that? Because that goes back quite a while. And, just a couple of minute or so kind of thing.
Okay, you'll have to cut me off because I love talking about Glenmore. It's it has a true family history for me. My wife's father, the late, great Frank Kessler, was the developer of Glenmore, and what an entrepreneur he was. And Glenmore was kind of the culmination of his real estate dream. If you go back in his life, he was a hard-working guy from New Jersey, came down to Charlottesville on a football scholarship, great big man. Got into the restaurant business in Charlottesville, one of the ones many of our listeners would know. He owned the Virginian for a period of time while he was in school. There's some stories about that. Just by the way, the reason he got into the restaurant business, because if you wanted to sell beer to the fraternities, you had to own a restaurant. He figured out that formula, and he was a big enough man. He's the man that can carry that keg on the shoulder. Big man.
I met him a couple of times.
Hard-working man, very passionate.
Yep.
But he married a wonderful woman from Charlottesville, Peggy Burkhead. It was obviously Peggy Kessler. And the two of them made a great team. She was into the dog, she was into the breeding, and she made that a business. German Shepherds. She ended up corgis, of which we have one that is somehow connected to her breeding. She's also passed away, but the two of them made it an amazing team. And so I had to mention her as well, because Frank was the one with the vision, but Peggy was the one who was kind of the co-pilot who helped him keep everything in check. And long story short, he transfers into the real estate business in the early 80s. And he worked with a lot of great people. Bill Howard is one of them that he worked very closely with. Lenny Mayhew is somebody he worked very closely with. Steve Runkle, Charlie Armstrong, Art Pearson. The list is long, and talk about legendary people. But he founded Real Estate 3, grew that company, got into the land development business. His first big play is Forest Lakes up on 29 North. 1,600 homes with a swim and tennis club, but it didn't have the golf. His oldest daughter, Candy Comer, was a professional golfer. Frank goes with Candy to all her golf tournaments, primarily in southeast USA, so Carolinas down into Florida. While he's at these different country clubs, he's taking notes. I like this, I like that. He loved the equestrian field that some of these communities had. He loved the private country club, not semi-private, not public. We can get into more of that later, but Glenmore was private country club, members and guests only. He found that down in Boca Raton. And so he took essentially his greatest hits, his vision, and he found Glenmore, the property. It was 1,600 acres. It was just a farm for sale, not in the growth area. Len Mayhew shows it to him. Bill Howard has a part in the transaction. The Jessup family were financial partners in the acquisition, and he ends up purchasing what I think still is the most beautiful piece of property that I've ever walked on. Buys this property, and being my father-in-law, he taught me a lot about the business, and he shared his vision. I'll bring this to a conclusion in just a second, but he drives me out in his blue Suburban, which many of our listeners or people that are watching the show had been in that blue Suburban for the tour. He drives me out to the spot where the country club was going to be, and he looks overlooking Monticello, overlooking the Rivanna River, and he says, "This is where I will build my club." I can go on, let you ask any other questions, but he ends up getting, this would be a whole nother story. He and Steve Runkle had to work like crazy to get the property into the growth area.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was not, so it had to go through the rezoning, and so he took a chance buying a property not in the growth area and going through all.
Which is not normal.
No, it's usually the other way around.
It's usually the other way around.
You'll appreciate this. The member guest tournament's happening right now. The guys just put on the feed. We're watching Jeff at the member guest tournament right now, talking about Glenmore.
Yes.
It was awesome.
Yes.
I love social media used for the good. Keith, you got something on your brain over there.
Yeah, so I actually was fortunate enough to meet Mr. Kessler once and tour around in that Suburban. I was fortunate enough built one of the first custom homes on Darby over there back when I was a young man, much younger than I am now, and a newbie in the business. And he never treated me that way. Always treated me with respect. We were building a half a dozen custom homes at the time, and said, okay, yeah, we'll work together. We'll help you out. And they, helped me through the process on that end of it. And I often think of that when I drive by there and think of him. I get a little bit of chills thinking about it.
Well, he would have, there's no doubt he would have liked you, because you guys have a lot in common. The Yankee part, he loved dealing with.
We didn't do that, though. Let's be honest. We very quickly decided we would not talk about Jersey and New York.
Yes.
We decided that was
But
not.
neither of you could hide it, and that's a good thing. In Charlottesville, every third person you run into has northern roots, and so, but I'm sure he appreciated more than anything your work ethic, because that's what you bring to the table. Keith, you always have. You're an honest man, hardworking man, and that's exactly the DNA that Frank
So what are you
Kessler.
doing the rest of the day? Because you can follow me around, keep on telling me that. And steal Jerry.
I know
Jerry's
you.
quote.
I've seen you.
I've seen Jerry's quote.
Kevin Higgins watching the program. Frank's nickname, I think he says, was Papa Bear. Can you ask Jeff where that name came from?
It was really just the bear, and there's a lot of legendary stories around the name the bear, but when Frank was in his college days and just out of college, he had a temper. I guess he always had a bit of a temper, but he got into a lot of fights. And the first thing that he would do when he got into a fight is that shirt came off. And let me tell you something, it looked like an absolute grizzly bear coming at you. And so he was well named, and the grandkids called him Grand Bear and the Bear, but his closest friends would certainly, if they saw him back in the day, would say, "What's up, Bear?"
So I often wonder, you take a look at Forest Lakes and you take a look at Glenmore, and these were purely visionary projects on it, and how, the process was much easier back then, right? And I think, could you actually reproduce them today? And I'm not so sure about that. Could you actually reproduce, could Mr. Kessler...
I mean, Old Trail's a kind of an example of that.
Yeah, but Old Trail is what? 20 years in the making? Old Trail's been around for a while. I'm talking about today. It would be really hard to reproduce Glenmore today, I think.
When Frank was alive, his last few years, he died in 2003, he made it very clear, because of the policy of the county, which is mostly a good policy, which is to maximize density in the growth area in order to preserve the rural area. Okay, so that makes sense as a theme, but as a result of that, all the projects that are being approved today are all interconnected with alley roads and kind of a mishmash of product. There's a lot of high-density stuff in there, and so what Frank was able to do is he caught on to the tail end of those two projects. He believed in the cul-de-sac, and today's growth plan does not. They want everything interconnected, and so it's really interesting. To answer your question, there's no chance you could get private roads approved today.
Yeah, sure.
There's no chance.
Mm-hmm.
There's no chance you could get a gatehouse, security gate. No chance. And then no chance with 3/4 of an acre home site on a cul-de-sac. You can't. None of that's being approved.
Not in this area, anyway.
No.
Not in this area. So that's kind of why, if you take a look at what's active in Glenmore right now, let's talk about the market right now in Glenmore and the pendings that are in there and stuff like that. It's attracting people, and I think COVID had a lot to do with that. Are you seeing that on the ground there, and how do you seeing, we got crystal balls here, but we can bring them out if you want, and you can go your soothsayer thing, but how do you see Glenmore going down the road?
You are exactly right. There's really three markets, but pre-pandemic, 2018, 2019, if I toured you around Glenmore, we might have 40 homes to look at. Everyone in Glenmore wanted to scale down to 2 blocks away from the downtown mall, or they were going to age out to something like Westminster, Canterbury. That's what was happening demographically. And everybody, I'm not saying everybody wanted out, but the people that were moving, and they were in that phase of life. So if you were a buyer coming in, I have 40 homes to show you. It might take me 3 weeks to cover all of the inventory. Then the pandemic hits. And the pandemic, from a lifestyle standpoint, was phenomenal for the Glenmore real estate market. because people, all of a sudden, they went from not wanting the big house, I hate to call it the McMansion, but
So they wanted the room.
now the pandemic comes, and you have kids, grandkids, multi-generational living in the same home, so all of a sudden, they appreciate the 5,000 or 6,000 square feet where everyone can spread out and still have Wi-Fi, and then you step outside.
That's it.
And you start to appreciate the natural beauty, what, probably the number one amenity that people like at Glenmore are the paved walking trails.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have to worry about cars if you're walking your dog, or it's very safe to ride the bike. And then that isn't even talking about the other 8 miles of equestrian trail that go through the community. And so getting outside during the pandemic, it totally brought back, it was the great comeback in the market, and Glenmore experienced
Well, the
a lot of
second
that.
great comeback was the golf courses,
Yes.
right? The pandemic, all of a sudden, golf courses started.
Anything outside, any sport outside.
Yeah, but-
Especially if you're swinging something and people have to stand a distance away from you.
Yeah, particularly if you put a golf club in my hand. You really want to stay away from
I mean,
it.
tennis, pickleball, paddle, golf, I mean, it all took off.
I've got a couple numbers. Let me
Yeah,
beat
yeah.
you to the number on
Yeah,
Glenmore.
sure.
So in 2019, there was 59 homes sold in pre-pandemic Glenmore. 2020, there's 70 homes sold. 2021, which I think ends up being kind of the peak of the market, there's 99 home sales.
Yeah.
60+% increase in sales in Glenmore. Now, I will have to give credit to Craig Builders. We had some new construction going on. Stanley Martin was building, and so there was a product offered that was sort of missing pre-pandemic.
Oh,
And the
it went down to nothing.
The Glenmore Highlands, what Craig Builders and a little bit of Stanley Martin did back there, they rolled right through that. And they built the perfect home for the Glenmore buyer.
Sure.
And they hit it. But the last one I want to give you, Jerry, is that 2022, we'll talk about the rest of this year a little bit later in the show, but there's been 57 sales, and the average sales price in Glenmore is now $1 million.
So I've got a 20-year spreadsheet in front of me that I ran Glenmore, and I always break it out, new construction, whatever, but it's interesting. So new construction in 2020, this is year to date, this is as of today, was 27, new construction 30, which is existing, which just matches your numbers. But it's interesting when I'm focused on no new construction. To your point earlier, 2020 was like 90 days on market, right? And Albemarle County in 20, pulling out Glenmore, was 29.
2020 Q1 and probably half of Q2, if not all of Q2 2020, the DOM was long. It wasn't toward the back end, the final 2 quarters of 2020, did those DOMs start shrinking. Because when we bought March 2020 in Glenmore,
It was way higher than that.
I mean, inventory had been sitting for a year and a half and more. And then his take is 1,000% right.
Yep.
And then what ended up happening is, it's almost like you saw, like, and this happens from generation to generation in neighborhoods, you saw young blood moving into this community, young families. Now wherever you go around the neighborhood, and this dude runs all over the neighborhood, you see nothing but young moms and kids being pushed around those walking paths.
So is that trend staying?
I think so. A lot of the young families, they're thinking about lifestyle more than ever.
Yep.
They're thinking about safety more than ever. School, there are so many options on schools now. It used to just be, let's look at what the public school has to offer, but now there's so many terrific private
yeah,
schools, and then the home schools have had a real renaissance in Glenmore. And so when you add that all up, and on top, if you like the amenities, if you like a private country club with beautiful 18-hole golf course, But the other thing that I want to make sure that your listeners understand is that most golf country club communities, when they go big time on golf, they usually skimp out on tennis. Tennis is kind of the runt of the litter. Well, Frank had two daughters. First daughter, Candy, was the golf pro. His younger daughter, my wife, Mo, was a very accomplished tennis player. And so when you come to Glenmore, the tennis is not second rate. It is, I believe.
Maybe best clay courts in the area. I had to say this. I don't want to put you in a tough spot. Maybe the best clay courts in the area. Boar's Head, I might catch some grief for saying this. Boar's Head's right there neck and neck. You might have the best clay courts in the area.
That's kind of where I was going, is I believe that to be the case. And since the membership is smaller than Boar's Head, you can always get a court. So if you are a tennis player, you like that sport, and now many more are transitioning into pickleball. And Jerry helped with the club ownership in that transition to pickleball. If you like to be physically fit at Glenmore, there is so much to do.
Yeah, I will not get in, my family will not get into pickleball because that's a hard racket, and when Yona gets pissed at me, it hurts.
Fastest growing sport in America.
Oh, without a doubt.
Pickleball.
But one of the things I personally loved about Glenmore, and still to this point, is the way you guys developed it with that boulevard approach, which I know firsthand is super expensive, right? They could have pushed their development closer to 250, but instead they have this, if anybody's ever driven in there, you go through this beautiful, paddocks with horses in it, and this boulevard approach that goes into before you start getting into the houses, because his vision was more back on the back end with the river and the mountains and stuff like that. So it's really neat. So you're high on Glenmore. You think it's going to track well, because at the moment you only got you had 40 homes. You got 8 homes now that are not new construction on the market, ranging from 800,000 to looks like a little over 1.5 million on that end of it, and you've got 4 pending, so that's a pretty darn good ratio.
Phenomenal ratio.
Well, and there's a couple different markets within Glenmore. You have the cottages, which are typically one-level living, mostly all brick on smaller home sites that provide, you pay for it, but it provides a maintenance package. You can't find a cottage for sale. When they come up, that is in such high demand, and those would sell $500 to $750, and I would just tell you, if we had 200 of those for sale today, we'd have it sold out by the weekend. The demand there is phenomenal. And then after that is another neighborhood called the Scottish Homes. Scottish Homes, slightly larger home sites, but still with a maintenance package. Those two markets are so hot, nothing ever for sale. A lot of them are kind of off-market deals that happen, and they are so well done, and that is really tailored to today's buyer, particularly if they are scaling down.
So that's very important. You mentioned this off-market business, because Glenmore is kind of unique in that fashion. There's quite a lot of off-market that we don't see in MLS that happens.
People doing deals walking around the loop.
And that's exactly right. And it skews what we're looking at right now, because you're smiling because it's true, right?
We get cold call. Jeff, this is a true story. Cold call, knock on the door offer. Like something that my wife and I were like, you know what, we have to consider this. They toured the house, ready to rock and roll. Tough part for us is, where do you go? And the interest rate we got is 4. Now would be, 6 and change. And then the delta on the houses is where that chunk we'd walk away with would go to the down payment, and then you got the higher rate. And we got everything we need now. So it's like, it's a tough decision to make. But he's right, deals happening that aren't hitting the MLS right now because it's so beautiful. And I would love if you highlight what Craig and Stanley have done with the new construction, because the cost of goods and the labor, the new construction's at let's cut to the chase, a nice little price point, which is raising the values of existing. and homes that have been around since 97, 2000, 2003.
Sure. Jerry, you hit on a great point with the new construction. So Craig Builders, for example, they're pretty much sold out of the Glenmore Highlands, but if you were to walk into their model home, they have hit every bell and whistle that there is. The first thing that I see my buyers do is the huge kitchen island Craig uses what they call leathered granite. And so if you have a home that's 20 or 25 years old, you might have Corian, or you might even back up and have a Formica.
Wood edge Formica, that was the big thing. Remember those?
Yes. That was high dollar stuff.
That was high dollar stuff, I know. You still own a cabinet company.
If you walk in, you should see the emotion that occurs when the buyers, they basically hug the leathered granite island, and then everywhere you go from there. The other main thing, you guys have probably covered this on the show, when you walk into the bathroom, once upon a time, everywhere was a jetted tub and a fairly modest shower. Now they've ditched the jetted tub because nobody wants it anyway, unless you have grandkids there. It's great for fun with them, but they've gone with these huge showers that they jokingly call the car wash.
Right.
It's so big, and so the emotion that comes out of, we've said for years in the industry, kitchens and bathrooms.
Yep.
The kitchens and bathrooms are phenomenal on the new builds today. And so, Jerry, to your point, that kind of primes the pump for the buyer, and maybe they don't go with a Glenmore Highland, but that helps turn them on to the whole Glenmore experience. They go find another home, maybe doesn't have those amenities, but they've already seen in their mind what can be.
And then they call an interstate service company and have them come in and update their home, which we just did. We just literally, our house is 20 years old, pulled out our jetted tub because you had to have one 20 years ago, and put a 6-foot double head shower in it. And when you reach a certain age, you'll understand this. We replaced the jetted tub with a bench so we could sit down and put our socks on.